Striking difference, and by the way, thank you so much, Rachel. That passage is a challenging one. How many of you feel super comfortable and happy after hearing that? How many of you are a little confused, not sure what's going on? Yeah. How many of you have heard this preached on before? I'm sure people here, I mean, you've gotten really good sermons out of this. I know that in my lifetime, have heard some really terrible sermons about this passage. I guess I shouldn't be so critical, right? I mean, we're all trying our best, but in my opinion, maybe not interpreting it the best way. But, and the image of Stuffies that I'm leaving you all with, or at least starting us off with, this idea of sharing love, I'd like us to keep that in mind this morning. And it seems pretty different from what we just read. There's not a whole lot that seems to be in common with the idea of a slave master giving a very, very large sum of money. A talent is like 15 years of wages, just one talent. So 5 talents, 3, we're talking about a lot of money in those days. Somebody giving those, people investing that money, receiving more, whereas the other person who was hiding it is condemned, banished. Seems different, but it's funny how I get older, the more children, and maybe it's a good that I'm where I'm at. It's the more that children and their interests seem to not just delight me, but move me in some way. How just watching a child hug a Stuffy, as I get to do at the kids' night last night when kids are bringing their Stuffies, or at the children's choir, sometimes they'll bring something with them to keep them comfortable when they're in a new space. And sometimes that can move or even awaken my heart a little bit, and makes me wonder why that changes as we get older. And maybe it's because the world seems increasingly complex and insane and painful, and that things maybe don't seem so clear cut for us adults as they are for kids, and they can just direct their love at a Stuffy. Maybe it's also because, as Jesus says, we still have a lot to learn from children, the way they love and they trust. So I'm going to suggest this morning, I'm going to try to thread a needle here of how the lens of children and the way in which they love something like a stuffed animal can be a lens for us to view this difficult and debated and often irresponsibly interpreted passage. So what is about the love of stuffed animals that's important? I think we could talk about it as childlike love, but sometimes when we say childlike love, that's kind of dismissive because it's like something we've moved past as adults, right? Although we're supposed to be childlike, according to Jesus. And what does that even mean? Even as I mention this idea about Stuffies, it might feel a little uncomfortable, a little naive, or the idea that I'm loving something that is an inanimate object. Something that isn't real or can't really love me back fully. So this might not strike us as very helpful. But I'd like us to consider it a little bit differently. What if we're thinking about a stuffed animal as in the terms of the way it's there for us, even when things are tough? In the dead of night, our children and our grandchildren have something to hold on to when it feels like there's nobody else around. And unlike people, and yes, occasionally parents, believe it or not, can run out of patience. I know that you all have never run out of patience before, but it does happen from time to time. And guess what? A stuffed animal never runs out of patience. It's always there. Never asks us to change who our child or children or grandchildren are. Us are. You know what I mean. It never places expectations when we have so many expectations for ourselves and for our children. It doesn't place expectations or demands on us. And a child can also intuitively understand that when someone is hurting or afraid, that I can share out of the abundance that I can give. And that person can then, when they feel so compelled to share that, I keep it going. And if it comes back around, that's great. For those of us who seek the spiritual path in this life, the way of Jesus, whether you're in the first century when people are originally hearing these words, or the 21st centuries, this attitude is something that we are asked to cultivate, and that may seem really tough. The gospel's original audience has some similarities to ours. The early Christians, tied to their Jewish heritage in this case, still living in a time of Roman occupation, likely right after the destruction of the temple, they lived in this system called patronage, if you're familiar with Roman society at all. The idea was that if you were a wealthy benefactor, you were the patron, right? And you would offer protection to the plebeians, right? They were their clients or clients. And the patronage would consist of money or food or whatever it might be, and in return, they received respect, they received political favors. It was a quid pro quo system. And advancement in that society was very, very rare. You were pretty much locked into your social strata. That changed over time a little bit, but for the most part, advancement was very, very limited, mainly to those who already had a lot. Sound familiar at all? It's not all that different from our world today, where we extract and exploit, and those are kind of the norms. We kind of treat the world as the resources in the world are scarce. And because they're scarce, we are afraid of losing what we already have or not having enough in the future. And so that fear begins to motivate us to fight and to work. And in fact, our whole culture and our whole economy functions under the idea that we have to fight and work for the scraps of the land and the resources and whatever that we can, otherwise we're going to lose out, right? Jesus is discussing the reign of God, however, and the reign of God is a different kind of economy that is rooted in not scarcity, but abundance, grace, freedom, and responsibility, seeking the common good. So this passage is not the idea of praying to receive a financial blessing as it's often used on TV. That's subjecting God's economy to our ideas of the world economy. It's also just plain manipulative. This parable also, if we're trying to understand it, it's helpful to remember that parables are not meant to be exact metaphors. They're not meant to be exact allegories. There's many different ways you can look at it, much like you look at a piece of art, right? So probably the most popular way that you've read is similar to what we've already talked about with the Stuffies and sharing, is this idea that God bestows gifts to us. The difference in the gifts could be a point of concern, but the point is that God rewards those who share their gifts. And we're talking about, all the internal gifts, and we could also maybe talk about our resources that we share with others. And the idea is that those who share, those who are generous, and those who share of their own personal gifts will receive a reward of some sort. And that the people who are excluded from that are those who are selfish or those who are afraid or whatever. There's something to that. Somewhere along those lines, there's a range of interpretations that go along that. But there's another way to look at it, is because this can't be really God, because the landowner is kind of a jerk. He's a tyrant, steals from the weak and enslaves people. The story is about the way that Roman patronage system gives according to how much value that a slave can offer them. And so there's rewards for those who participate in this system and exclusions for those who don't play the game. And this is, again, an unequal game, so not everybody has equal access to it. So this is contrasted, and part of this is also, both of these interpretations kind of fit in the context. The earlier, the idea of using your resources, using what you have, not waiting around, being participating in the reign of God, that kind of fits with the bridesmaids idea that we heard about last week. Not waiting with expectancy and trying to live with good intentions and to try to live according to reign while we're waiting for Christ. But the reign of God also is about caring for the hungry, caring for the thirsty, for the imprisoned and the sick, because the next passage is the sheep and the goats. And if you know about the sheep and the goats, that is a explanation in many ways, and that can be read, and that kind of fits with this other interpretation. So there's lots of ways to look at this passage. Which is the right one? It's probably not the right question, right? Again, stories don't always have an exact right way to look at it. But one thing that I liked, one way or possibility that I kind of like is the idea that Jesus is asking us here how to imagine a slave master with ambitions. And there's ambitions to grow in strength, to grow in resources, grow their riches. And how they might dare to entrust their own wealth. What would happen if they were to entrust some of their wealth to those who work for them? Like how we reward capitalist ambition today, the master rewards the first two for expanding the empire. Of course, they might also have been a little bit afraid. The third servant is the one who gets credit for being afraid, but maybe those first two were kind of like, maybe they were afraid too, but their response to that was like, I'm going to try to impress this guy. Because if you don't fight, you lose, right? This is how the economy of scarcity works. And maybe Jesus is saying that in this world of scarcity, these servants wouldn't dare waste those resources. They are motivated by that fear, that ambition. How much more then should we who strive to live in God's economy of abundance share our stuffies, share our resources to grow in the kingdom of God? The key difference here is that the resources don't run out, because the main currency of this economy is grace. And grace abounds, and it spreads, and it doesn't dry up, and therefore no one is excluded. No one is cast out into the darkness. You see this kind of, one of the reasons why I like this way of looking at it is it kind of fits with Matthew's style. Matthew already has an example of talking about it in this way, in much the same subject matter. In Matthew 7, he says, the writer says, is anyone there among you who, when a child asks for bread, will give a stone? Or when a child asks for a fish, will give a snake? Not a good example. How much more then? If you who make mistakes, are not perfect, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will God give good things? We live in this economy of scarcity. The fact of the matter is we can't get away from the fact that there's limited amounts of things out there. But when we live in that reality fully, we don't get the full picture. Nature also cooperates. It doesn't just compete, it also cooperates. And when we live into that spirit of cooperation, we're living into the Spirit of God. When the story of scarcity is the only story, we become competitive. We fight for the scraps that we have. We begin to see ourselves as victims. When this escalates, it becomes violent. It can lead to war. It can lead to prolonged, intractable conflicts, as we see time and time again. We begin to see others as threats because others are in competition for what we need, for the resources we have. And when fear and ambition take over that, then our humanity begins to diminish. We justify using others. We are willing to silence stories. We even begin to fall into hate and scapegoating. On Transgender Awareness Sunday, that we are remembering the dead from just this past year. There's no reason why somebody being who they are should ever be seen as a threat to our existence, to whoever's existence, to anyone. There's a high degree of violence and discrimination, nevertheless, among those who identify as transgender. Who a person is shouldn't be a threat, and yet in a world of scarcity, fear turns to anger, and anger leads to scapegoating. In an economy of abundance, God's grace is not limited to those who uphold our societal images of what is a person is supposed to look like, or dress like, or present themselves, or who they choose to love, or where they come from. We learn to recognize and see people as people. Period, point blank. And when we see each other as people, we remember that we're part of a common family with amazing and beautiful gifts to share for each one of us. And we live in that economy of abundance together. It starts with this love, a resource that doesn't run out. So you see, there's a lot in a Stuffy. It's seeking the spiritual path in our lives means recognizing that this possibility of abundance is in us, and yet it must be practiced and nurtured because we're constantly imbued with a world of scarcity. It's always there. We're constantly trying to navigate it, and we can feel worn out. We can feel tired. We get busy with these things that just keep us cycling, circling. Time continues to march on, and as we move on, we say, oh, we're not kids anymore. And we can't just love and trust in that way. It might feel like living in an abundance. That idea passed us by a long time ago. The idea that we might conceive of what things will even look like in a common economy of abundance when our careers and our family and our life goals just are constantly putting those demands on us. And how are we even going to begin to make space for something like that? We try to figure out how to fit the good stuff into our schedules. We put all the less important things according to the way of God. We put all those things first, and we try to fit grace into the cracks. Maybe it should be a different order. Maybe we start with grace. Easier said than done. And yet, when we find generosity and compassion within us, we see these glimpses of it. The fact of the matter is, it's there. The fact of the matter is, it's in you. It's in all of us. We see it all the time. Even when things are tough, we still have these profound moments of humanity. The spark hasn't completely died off. We fit in those things in life that are important to us. It's how it's always been. And if we're being really, truly honest with ourselves, it's what we do. And we're heading into a season where it proves it. Thanksgiving, Christmas, we make space. Yes, we get stressed. Yes, but we also make space for family and for compassion and for generosity and love. And we can share in our abundance, like a coat drive, food drives, all those mailers that you're starting to get in the mail now, the emails maybe. You're getting inundated with them, and some of us are going to respond to a few of them. But maybe part of that is we see it as a perfunctory thing we're trying to get done with. Maybe this year we focus on, oh, well, what's my attitude in this giving? Maybe in the moment you say, oh, we remember how much we've been given. We remember our abundance. And then it's about cheerful, joyful giving, like we share something like a stuffed animal. There's so much that goes on. We could talk about this all morning, about how we find it restrictive and limiting our schedules and our demands in our lives. It's easy for us to run out of patience, and because unfortunately we're not stuffed animals, right? But if we can learn how to let go of that fear, how to set that fear aside, to not let that dictate who we are, then that also opens up the possibility of us learning how to forgive, how to tend the wound in others, how to see no stranger, as Valerie Kaur says. And out of this idea, we can begin to let go of some of those things that maybe weigh us down, and maybe there the space opens up. Begin to see new possibilities, partnership, sharing, working for justice, building trust with ourselves, with our community. I'd like you to take a moment now, be thinking about this image of sharing. Something as simple as a stuffy is the idea of sharing from our generosity, sharing from our abundance, sharing from the love, the abundance of love that God shows each and every one of us. When you think about what in our lives do we have in abundance? You can close your eyes, you can take a moment to just reflect. We're about to enter into a prayer time anyway. So just as a moment of transition, just be thinking about, what do we have? What do you have that feels like it's in abundance? And maybe that's financial or monetary resources, but maybe it's also something that you're thankful for that's within yourself. Something that comes naturally to you that may not always be so easy for all of us. Or maybe it's something that's been hard fought and hard won. But either way, it may be a gift of time or of your own personal abilities that you have. And just take a moment. The goal is not here to think about just about that gift, but also the attitude with which you carry these things. How can we show more gratitude and thankfulness in our own lives for the gifts that we've received? And how, out of that abundance, can we share? Can we be more generous in this time, especially as we're entering into Thanksgiving and to the Christmas season? And then the other piece is, of course, we feel deficits. So also ask us to consider, where is it that we're feeling those deficits? Where do we feel vulnerable and maybe not our fullest and best selves? Consider possibly how that might be the spirit of abundance, of grace, trying to tell us something. There may be something that we need to hear in that. It's not necessarily a curse or a weakness, but a message and an opportunity to remember that, like the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, we live day by day, moment to moment, by the grace of God. And in that space, there may be a message for us, something to forgive, someone to forgive, something to let go of, something to embrace, something to accept. Consider what those messages might be for yourself. Oh God, we acknowledge who we are as beautiful, wonderful children of God, those in this room, those online, and also those all around us. May we see no stranger and welcome or open our eyes to be able to see the good gifts in others as well as in ourselves, to be gentle to ourselves and to one another, and above all, to see and find love wherever it may be, and to be willing to share out of our abundance. In the name of Christ, amen.